Marcus Cole, an ER nurse and single dad, walked into court covered in blood, fighting for custody. When the judge questioned his commitment based on his scrubs, Marcus showed that real strength isn't about looks. It's about sacrifice. His fight didn't just change his life, it sparked a nationwide conversation about respect and dedication. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. The courtroom clock struck 9 a.m. The room was already filled with people, the usual mix of attorneys, clients, and spectators. At the front of the room sat Marcus Cole, a 38-year-old emergency room nurse, still wearing his faded blue scrubs. His sneakers were scuffed from running around in the trauma bay, and his hair was barely tied back from the chaotic shift he'd just finished. His badge still hung from his waistband, and bloodstains from the young boy he'd just saved clung to his uniform. Marcus had been up for 14 hours, working non-stop, saving lives in the ER. He hadn't had time to go home or change. His ex-wife, Lila, had fought him for custody of their 2 children, and today's hearing would determine if he'd get partial custody or if she'd take them full-time. It wasn't just about clothes, it was about the fight for his children. As he sat there waiting, his lawyer whispered, "Are you sure you're okay? You don't look like you've had a minute to breathe." Marcus only nodded. "I'm fine. I have to be here." The room was quiet as Judge Catherine Blanchard, a stern woman in her early 60s, scanned the courtroom. When her eyes landed on Marcus, they narrowed. She adjusted her glasses and took a long, deliberate look at him, still in his scrubs. The silence in the room felt heavy. Finally, she broke the quiet. "Mr. Cole," she said, her tone clipped, "do you think this is a hospital?" Marcus blinked in surprise but stayed composed. "No, Your Honor. I just finished a shift. I came straight here." The judge's eyebrow arched. "This is a courtroom. You're expected to dress appropriately. This is not a hospital break room." A few whispers rippled through the courtroom. People exchanged uncomfortable glances as Marcus's lawyer began to speak, but the judge cut him off. "Save it," she snapped. "Mr. Cole, you're here to fight for custody of your children, and you show up looking like you just rolled out of bed. This isn't a stage for dramatics." Marcus sat up straighter in his chair, his gaze steady, his jaw clenched but not angry. He could feel the weight of her words, but he wouldn't shrink. He had work to do, and his children needed him. He met her gaze with resolve. "With all due respect, Your Honor," he said softly but firmly, "these pajamas," he gestured to his scrubs, "still have blood on them. It's not mine. It's the blood of a 10-year-old boy I saved this morning. I didn't have time to change, Your Honor. I had time to save a life or be 5 minutes late for court. I chose to save a life." The courtroom froze. A few heads turned, and a woman in the back pulled out her phone, recording. The silence was thick. Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't look away from the judge. He had said what needed to be said. Judge Blanchard's eyes widened, but her lips pressed tightly together. The words stuck in her throat. She had no immediate response. The truth had entered the room, and it was wearing scrubs. Marcus's words hung in the air. His lawyer, Liam Rhodes, glanced nervously between Marcus and the judge. But the gallery? They weren't watching him anymore. They were focused on Marcus, waiting for the next move. Finally, the judge exhaled sharply. "This is not a place for dramatics, Mr. Cole," she muttered, but the firmness in her voice was gone. "No, ma'am," Marcus replied, his voice calm. "It's a courtroom, and I respect it enough to show up, even if it meant not changing out of the clothes I wore to save someone's child." The gavel slammed down with a sharp noise. "Let's proceed," Judge Blanchard said, but her voice lacked its usual bite. It was too late. Outside the courtroom, the video of Marcus's statement was already beginning to spread. By lunchtime, it had gone viral, and by 2 p.m., it had been seen by millions. The hashtag number "Let Him Wear Scrubs" trended. But Marcus wasn't paying attention to the trending topic or the views. After this hearing, he still had to pick up his kids from school. The same scrubs, the same tired body. He wasn't concerned with what people thought of his appearance. He just wanted to be there for his children, the ones he was fighting for. And the next time he spoke, the courtroom wouldn't be silent in surprise. It would be silent in respect. By 2 p.m., the courtroom had changed. The mood was no longer tense, but charged with an energy that hadn't been there before. The video of Marcus's words had gone viral, and with it, his voice. People were talking about it, sharing it, and for the first time, it felt like the world was on his side. It wasn't about his clothes, it was about the truth he had spoken. But Marcus wasn't following the buzz. He wasn't on social media or checking the news. He was in court, fighting for his children. And as the afternoon session began, his ex-wife, Lila, sat across from him with her new lawyer, a slick private attorney named Vincent Grant. Marcus knew Grant from a previous case. He was the kind of lawyer who thrived on theatrics, always looking for an angle, always ready to attack. Grant stood up, his tailored gray suit perfectly pressed. His cufflinks sparkled in the light, and he exuded the kind of confidence that Marcus had learned to ignore over the years. He approached the podium with a smirk that seemed to ooze entitlement. "Mr. Cole," Grant began, his voice dripping with condescension, "can you confirm that you voluntarily chose to work a night shift before your court appearance today?" Marcus, exhausted but steady, nodded. "Yes, I did." Grant paused, making sure everyone was hanging on his words. "And knowing that you had a custody hearing this morning, would it be fair to say that you prioritized your work over preparing for this case? Over your children?" The question was designed to make Marcus look bad, to frame him as neglectful. And for a moment, the room held its breath. A few spectators shifted uncomfortably. The judge's sharp eyes flicked between Marcus and Grant. Marcus didn't flinch. He leaned forward in his seat, his voice calm but firm. "No, sir," he said. "I prioritize the life of a child, because if it were my child coding on that table at 4 a.m., I would want someone to stay too. I didn't choose between my job and my children. I chose to be the kind of parent I'd want to show up if my kids needed saving." There was a brief silence in the room. For a second, it felt like time stopped. Marcus continued, "For the record, every night I work keeps a roof over their heads. My uniform might not impress this courtroom, but it feeds them, it protects them, and it pays for the therapy they needed when their mother walked out." A murmur ran through the gallery. A woman in the back dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Marcus didn't look around. He didn't need to. The truth had already spoken for him. Grant faltered. The confident smirk was gone. He cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "Mr. Cole, you're clearly emotional. That's understandable, but—" "I'm not emotional," Marcus interrupted, his voice quiet but filled with authority. "I'm exhausted. There's a difference. One comes from weakness. The other comes from doing everything you can to hold a family together while the world calls you unfit because you don't have time to iron your shirt." It was like a weight lifted from the room. For the first time that day, the courtroom felt still, uncomfortably still. The power had shifted, not because of a grand argument or an explosive statement, but because Marcus had stood up, told the truth, and reminded everyone of something they'd forgotten. In that moment, the decorum of the courtroom, the focus on procedure and appearance, seemed irrelevant. What mattered now wasn't the way Marcus looked or the clothes he wore. What mattered was his unwavering commitment to his children and his unshakable belief in the value of sacrifice. Grant returned to his seat, flipping through pages that suddenly seemed pointless. Marcus sat back, his eyes never leaving the judge, who had remained unusually quiet throughout the exchange. The judge's gavel remained in her hand, unmoving as the silence grew. It wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was respectful. For the first time, Judge Blanchard was forced to acknowledge something larger than the legal battle at hand. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected Marcus to fight back, not like this. Finally, she broke the silence. "We'll take a recess," she said, her voice softer than before. "Let's reconvene after lunch." As the court session recessed, Marcus didn't look for applause. He didn't look for approval. His focus was still on his kids, still on winning the fight for their future. But outside the courtroom, the world had already taken notice. By the time the lunch break ended, Marcus's words were being shared across social media. Headlines were starting to form. The nurse in scrubs who refused to apologize. The father who chose a child's life over his own comfort. And for the first time in a long while, Marcus Cole didn't feel like he was fighting alone. The lunch recess didn't offer much relief for Marcus. His body was still aching from the grueling night shift, and his mind was racing, replaying the exchanges from the morning session. But as he sat in the hallway, snacking on a granola bar. The world outside the courtroom was buzzing with a momentum he hadn't anticipated. The video of his defense had exploded across social media. His words, raw and unfiltered, had struck a chord with people everywhere. By the time the court reconvened, his story had become something much bigger than a simple custody battle. It was a message, a statement. Marcus's phone buzzed with notifications as his lawyer, Liam Rhodes, sat beside him, staring at the screen. "Your words are everywhere, Marcus," Liam said softly, showing him a clip that had already reached over 2 million views. Marcus barely glanced at it. "It's not about the views, it's about my kids." "I know," Liam replied, "but people are starting to take notice. You're not just fighting for your kids anymore. You're fighting for something bigger." He paused, tapping his phone. "People are listening." Marcus leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes. "That's not why I'm here. I'm here to be a father. Nothing else matters." Liam didn't argue. He knew Marcus's heart. He understood the gravity of the situation, and as the minutes ticked by, he couldn't help but wonder if Marcus had unknowingly become the voice of many others, who had been silenced by a system that often prioritized appearances over actions. As the doors to the courtroom opened, Marcus rose to his feet. The audience inside had grown since the morning, and there was a palpable sense of anticipation in the air. Even some of the opposing party's legal team had stopped whispering and were now watching with rapt attention. When Marcus entered, the murmur of the crowd quieted. His presence, still in the same bloodstained scrubs, carried a weight that couldn't be ignored. The moment he walked to his seat, the air felt thicker. The respect he had earned wasn't about his attire or his words. It was about his actions, his sacrifice, and his unyielding commitment to doing what was right. The judge entered the room, and for the first time all day, she seemed hesitant. Her steps were slower than usual, and when she took her seat, her gaze briefly flicked to Marcus before she adjusted the papers in front of her. The gallery was watching her closely, and so was Marcus. He hadn't expected much from Judge Blanchard, not after the morning's exchange. But now as she surveyed the room, it seemed like she was reflecting on something deeper, something that hadn't been there before. As the proceedings resumed, Vincent Grant stood up to continue his cross-examination. He had clearly adjusted his strategy after the morning's debacle, no longer focusing on Marcus's attire, but on trying to paint him as irresponsible and reckless. "Mr. Cole," Grant began, "can you confirm that you intentionally worked a night shift before this hearing, knowing full well the importance of your children's custody?" Marcus's eyes never left him. He didn't flinch. "Yes," he replied, his voice calm. "I worked that shift because people needed me. My children are important, but so is the work I do. And if my children needed me at that moment, I would have chosen them. But today, a child needed me more." Grant scoffed. "And yet you still came here, not prepared, not on time, not dressed properly. Isn't that a sign of your priorities?" The room waited for Marcus's response. His words were deliberate and slow, but they carried an intensity that couldn't be ignored. "You don't understand. I didn't come here unprepared. I came here to show up. I didn't come to impress anyone with my appearance. I came to show you that a mother or father doesn't get to choose between saving lives or fighting for their children. We do both, and we don't apologize for it." The court fell silent again, but this time the silence wasn't filled with discomfort. It was filled with understanding. Even the opposing side's team seemed to stiffen in their seats, caught off guard by the truth of Marcus's words. Then, just as the tension seemed to reach its peak, the door opened and a new witness stepped into the courtroom. It was Dr. Rachel Allen, the head of the emergency room department at St. Joseph's Hospital and a close colleague of Marcus's. Dr. Allen, a calm and composed woman in her mid-40s, walked to the witness stand with no notes, no hesitation. She stood tall in her white coat, her expression resolute. As soon as she was sworn in, she addressed the room, her eyes locking with Judge Blanchard's. "I'm here to clarify the role Marcus Cole plays in our hospital," she began. "It seems his scrubs were mistaken for laziness or disrespect, but I assure you they are a symbol of dedication. Marcus is the nurse I rely on when the new staff freeze in trauma. He's the one who holds the hands of dying children while their parents are stuck in traffic. He skipped lunch 26 days last spring to ensure the others got a break. He didn't wear scrubs to insult this court. He wore them because he stayed to stabilize a child who stopped breathing. There was a collective intake of breath in the gallery. Marcus felt a lump form in his throat. He hadn't expected Dr. Allen to be here, but he was grateful. She was here for him when he couldn't speak for himself. Dr. Allen turned to the judge. "If you think that's disrespect, Your Honor, I suggest you spend a Friday night in our trauma ward. Spend one night in his shoes." The silence was deafening. The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted. There was a quiet reverence hanging in the air, as though everyone had collectively acknowledged something larger than the legal case they were witnessing. As Dr. Allen finished her testimony, the room sat in stunned silence, absorbing the weight of her words. For the first time that day, Judge Blanchard didn't seem to be looking for a flaw or a way to control the narrative. She seemed reflective, even a bit shaken. As Dr. Allen left the witness stand, the gallery's attention remained fixed on Marcus. The same people who had once silently judged him for his appearance, who had whispered about his scrubs, were now watching him with a mix of respect and awe. He had stood tall in the face of harsh criticism, and now his character was coming to light. It wasn't about the clothes anymore. It was about who he was, what he had sacrificed, and the love he held for his children. Judge Blanchard adjusted her glasses, staring down at the evidence on her desk. For the first time in the trial, she looked at Marcus not as a defendant, not as a man in scrubs, but as a father. She cleared her throat, signaling the end of the recess, and the courtroom settled into an uneasy stillness. "Mr. Cole," Judge Blanchard's voice rang out, breaking the silence. "It's clear to me that you have no interest in portraying yourself as a victim here. You've made your position clear, and while your attire may have been questioned earlier, it is your actions, your sacrifice, that now speak louder than any clothes you wear." Marcus held his breath. The words he had longed to hear, the acknowledgement of his sacrifice, were finally being spoken aloud, but there was still much to fight for. This wasn't over yet. But before Marcus could respond, the opposing attorney, Vincent Grant, rose to his feet, attempting to regain his footing after his earlier missteps. He walked toward the podium with renewed composure, although his demeanor was less assured than before. He had clearly miscalculated in underestimating Marcus's resolve. "Your Honor, we must acknowledge that while Mr. Cole's actions are commendable in the context of his work, the question remains, is this the man who can provide the stability and structure that these children need? It's clear he has placed his professional obligations above his parental ones. And while we all admire his dedication to saving lives, a child needs more than just a father who shows up in a crisis. They need consistency, routine, and an environment where they can grow." The words stung, and there was a brief ripple of discomfort in the gallery. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond immediately. He had already shown his strength. This now was about his children, not about what he wore or how he was perceived. Judge Blanchard turned her gaze from the opposing attorney back to Marcus, her eyes more contemplative now. The pause hung in the air like the calm before a storm. Marcus knew that the verdict was coming, but what he didn't expect was what followed. "Mr. Cole," Judge Blanchard began, her tone softer now, "you've shown a level of sacrifice and commitment that many could only dream of. Your dedication to your children is clear, as is your commitment to your work. However, being a parent isn't just about showing up in a crisis. It's about being there every day, being present for the mundane moments that make up a child's life." Marcus nodded, his voice steady. "Your Honor, I am there. I don't want to just be the parent who saves them when it's too late. I'm the one who holds them when they're scared at night. I'm the one who makes sure their homework is done and their lunches are packed. I am there every single day. My job doesn't define me. I do." The quiet that followed his words was thick with emotion. For the first time in this case, it felt as though the balance was tipping in his favor. The gallery, which had once held its breath in judgment, was now quiet, waiting for the judge to make her decision. Even the opposing side was silent. There was no more room for arguments based on appearances or superficial assessments of his abilities as a parent. Judge Blanchard sat back in her chair, looking at Marcus with a new understanding. She had been tough, determined to uphold the law, but now she was seeing things differently. She looked at him not as a man in scrubs, but as a father who had fought for his children in a way few others would ever truly understand. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice firm but measured, "this court has seen many cases, many families, and many claims. But what you've demonstrated here today is something we rarely see. It is not just your ability to fight, but your ability to sacrifice, to show up, and to put others before yourself. And that, in this court, means something." There was a long pause before she added, "I am ruling in favor of Mr. Cole. Full custody shall remain with him. There is no evidence, legal or moral, to suggest that these children would be better served elsewhere." For a moment, the room was still. Then, without warning, the gallery broke into applause. The lawyers, the court clerks, and even the bailiff stood up. They weren't clapping for a ruling, but for the man who had changed the tone of the entire courtroom. Marcus stood there, stunned. He wasn't used to attention, and certainly not like this. But this time, the applause was for him, for his strength, his sacrifice, and his unwavering devotion to his children. As the applause continued, Judge Blanchard finally spoke again. "This court recognizes that real justice serves those who show up, even when they are running on empty. You have taught us all a lesson today, Mr. Cole, not in the law, but in what it truly means to be a parent." The applause that followed Marcus's victory in court echoed through the halls. The room, once filled with tension and judgment, had transformed into a place of unexpected respect. For Marcus, it wasn't about the recognition, it wasn't about the applause, it was about his children. It was about proving to them and to himself that he could fight for them, not just in crises, but in every moment of their lives. As the court session ended, Marcus felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The battle for custody had been long and difficult, but in the end, it wasn't just the legal arguments that had mattered, it was the truth he had lived. And now his children were going to stay with him, where they belonged. Outside the courthouse, the air felt different. People gathered around, the media swarming as cameras flashed, eager to capture the man who had shown up covered in blood, yet had won the day with nothing but his strength and honesty. They wanted sound bites, a catchy quote. But Marcus didn't have time for that. He walked past the reporters, his mind already on the next thing, his kids. He needed to get home, to be with them, to give them the stability he had promised. But before he could reach the door, a familiar voice called out to him. "Marcus," Liam called, catching up with him. "You know, you've become something more than just a father in this. People are going to be talking about you. Your story has gone viral. You're everywhere." Marcus stopped and turned. He wasn't interested in fame or recognition. He just wanted to be the father his children needed. "It's not about me, Liam. It's about them. They're the ones who matter." "I get it," Liam said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "But don't underestimate what you've done. You've made a statement, not just about custody, but about how we all see people who work in emergency services. You've shown the world what real sacrifice looks like." Marcus gave a weary smile. "Maybe, but today wasn't about making a statement. It was about standing up for my kids, and that's all that matters." As he left the courthouse, he could feel the eyes of the world on him. But it wasn't the spotlight that he felt. It was the weight of his responsibility. The courtroom may have applauded him, but Marcus knew there was still so much work to do. His kids were still growing, still learning, and he needed to be there for them. Later that night, as Marcus tucked his children into bed, his daughter whispered, "Daddy, do you think they'll forget?" Marcus smiled and brushed a lock of hair from her forehead. "They might forget my name, sweetheart, but they won't forget what we showed them. That being strong doesn't mean being loud. It means showing up, even when it's hard." As he sat there watching them drift off to sleep, Marcus thought about the ripple effect his actions had created. The story of the nurse in scrubs had become more than just a viral sensation. It had sparked a larger conversation about what it truly means to sacrifice for others. And in doing so, it had challenged the world to reconsider its priorities. The next day, Marcus received a call from the curator of the National Museum of American Labor and Service. They wanted to include his scrubs, the very same ones he wore that day in court, as part of a permanent exhibit on American heroes. They weren't asking for a token. They were asking for a piece of history that symbolized a shift in how we view sacrifice and commitment. He hesitated for a moment, then agreed. The scrubs were more than just fabric to him. They represented his dedication, his struggle, and the love he had for his children. He mailed them in, knowing that they would serve as a reminder of what it truly means to show up, even when it's tough. Months passed, and the exhibit was unveiled. The story of Marcus and his scrubs became a symbol of humility, resilience, and dedication. His actions that day had started a movement. Nurses, doctors, and other emergency workers across the country wore their uniforms with pride, not just in their hospitals, but wherever they went. People began to understand that what really mattered wasn't the appearance, but the sacrifice behind the uniform. At home, Marcus continued his life, never seeking attention, never craving accolades. He went back to his night shifts, kissed his children goodnight, and worked tirelessly to give them the best life he could. He didn't want to be a symbol, he just wanted to be a father. One morning, as Marcus walked his daughter to school, she turned to him and asked, "Daddy, when I grow up, can I wear scrubs like you?" Marcus knelt down, smiling at her. "You can wear whatever you want, baby, as long as you remember to show up for the people who need you. That's what matters." And as they walked together to school, the world seemed a little quieter, a little kinder, knowing that people like Marcus Cole were out there, doing the hard work, showing up, and never asking for anything in return.